We've got 11 must-start players and sleepers here for Week 8. Dave Kluge, the NFL and fantasy football this week, of course, because the NFL decided let's just not have buys in Week 8, but then let's put a bunch in Week 7. Makes no
AI,
sense.
right?
Now,
That's who we have to blame
yeah,
for this. Thanks, AI.
yeah. Thanks, AWS, and all of your fun algorithms. But it's
IBM
weird because
Watson, I believe. I don't even
all
know.
of them, all of them. Let's
One
just
of
blame
them.
every company.
ChatGPT, what are you up to?
Thanks a lot, Silicon Valley. We're looking at the players, like who to start, who to sit, and it was just kind of weird to take a look at these players because it's just a lot of them are pretty obvious. Like we want to give you guys actionable advice, and looking at the roster of players, it was kind of like looking at a Cheesecake Factory menu. There was just too many options, right? Like it's weird. By the way, did you see that little like meme floating around of the places that women do not want their significant others to take them for a first date? Cheesecake Factory, number one.
I took my wife.
Number
Our first
one.
date was at a dog park, and we made it
That's
10
a
years. So
perfect date. That's a
it is.
perfect date.
Oh,
I was lame.
Oscar, my old bulldog, man, he was the best wingman possible.
Oh, that's no, you nailed it. You can probably hear my dogs in the background. They're going crazy right now. All right, let's get into our running back starts and sleepers of the week. But before we do that, if you're just enjoying this show, you've watched a few episodes before, but you haven't subscribed to the Football Guys channel, please make sure that you are subscribed to the Football Guys YouTube channel. We're bringing you this show 4 times a week here on YouTube and a 5th episode on the audio version. And we've got other shows here, the Audible, the Football Guys Dynasty show on Tuesdays. We've got the DFS show. We've got our Sunday live start sit. So much great content over here at Football Guys. Make sure you like this video and drop a comment in the comment section down below. All right, Dave, give us your first running back start of the week.
Bold move asking for a thumbs up before we even gave our starts of the week, because now I'm going to say Rhamondre Stevenson's name and everybody's going to give us a thumbs down. Yeah. I mean, I was not a big fan of Rhamondre Stevenson coming into this year. And I think a lot of what the concerns we had have come to fruition. A lot of the high value touches, some passing work, and almost all of the goal line work is going Ezekiel Elliott's way. But this is a matchup where I think you're okay starting Rhamondre Stevenson. They're playing on the road against Miami. They've got the biggest point differential on the week. They are 9.5-point underdogs against Miami. Now, Vegas doesn't always get it right, but they're pretty good about it. And this probably means that New England is going to find themselves in a position where they're going to have to play from behind. And over the last 2 weeks, we've seen Rhamondre's role in the passing game grow. 20-plus routes in both games. He's seen 6 targets in back-to-back weeks. He's been disappointing this year, no doubt about it. You drafted this guy as almost a back-end RB1, and he's hardly been startable for the majority of the season, but the target volume should be there in this game. That sets up a high floor, sets up a high ceiling. So I've got him ahead of some names that you're probably kind of on the fence about. Gus Edwards has a great matchup against Arizona, but I like Rhamondre Stevenson more. Deonta Foreman coming off a huge week. Assuming Roschon Johnson is back this week, I prefer Rhamondre ahead of Deonta Foreman. I prefer him ahead of Kareem Hunt against Seattle, even with Jerome Ford out, because I'm expecting Pierre Strong to be in the mix. I think this is one of those matchups where we see a lot of targets going Rhamondre Stevenson's way, and he can provide high-end RB2 upside.
Rhamondre, I know that we haven't really liked him that much, and I'm sure that the Rhamondre Stevenson drafters have been disappointed because of where they drafted him before the season and the expectations and blah, 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 blah. But there's been some weeks where he's been pretty usable. I'm looking right now, and he's had 4 weeks as a top 17 running back. And so I don't see why that's not once again possible this week. And one of those weeks was against Miami, where he had 15 PPR points. And so Miami has proven they're pretty beatable on the ground. And Rhamondre,
the expectations are what have really kind of ruined it. I mean, in the offseason, people were talking about Rhamondre is going to be the overall RB1. He should be drafted. Okay. If he was going in the top 3, I'd still be drafting him. And I think people got a little over their skis on Rhamondre Stevenson. He still is doing what you want to see from a fantasy running back. He's not going to unlock that ceiling that we had hoped for, but I think he still makes for kind of a fine RB2. And I will say his schedule also softens up a lot over the rest of the season. We've seen his usage grow a little bit. So not only am I saying that he's a start this week, but he's also a potential buy low if somebody is panicking a bit.
Yeah, and you talk about the usage growing. It's changing too to more of those high value touches. I know that Ezekiel Elliott is getting a lot of that goal line work, but we are seeing Rhamondre is getting a bit more of that passing work than he was getting earlier in the season. At least 6 targets in each of the last 2 games, so that's growing. I wouldn't be surprised if it happens again here going up against Miami. Now, once again, Dave, you have taken it upon yourself that during your start of the week, you have bashed a start of mine. Thank you.
Completely unintentionally.
I'm going to go with Kareem Hunt here going up against Seattle. And this is just largely because there is no Jerome Ford. And anytime that you get a running back thrust into what could be a big role, you have to consider starting them. And I'm not saying, must start, but I'm saying that there are going to be plenty of fantasy teams out there that don't have the proper running back landscape, right? Like they don't have two good must start running backs. And I've got Kareem Hunt right there on that borderline as my running back 25. Since week 6, in the 2 games that he's, really been active for the Browns, he's been averaging just over 15 PPR points. And going up against the Seahawks, they've been kind of hit or miss against running backs. They're 14th against running backs in terms of fantasy points. And this week, I've got Kareem Hunt as the running back 25. Okay, I got him projected for a little over 12 points. The good thing is that, we've seen Kareem Hunt is getting used around the goal line. A lot of his fantasy production has been buoyed by those 3 touchdowns that he has in 2 games, right? He's been a little limited recently with the thigh injury, and I know that there's people looking at the injury reports saying, he might not play this week. He's gonna play. He had the same thigh injury last week, and I believe the week before that. It's been kind of a lingering thing for him. But with Jerome Ford out, Kareem Hunt likely to take the bulk of the work here. I know there's some worry about Pierre Strong. Going up against Seattle, they've allowed 4 running backs to catch at least 4 passes in 4 of their last 5 games. Kareem Hunt, that's where his skill set is. It's a guy that's going to catch passes out of the backfield. And so we know that he's at least going to give you that receiving floor. And then he's got that upside with the touchdowns. Once again, we got a Browns offense that's going to be led by PJ Walker. So it might not be that dynamic, but I'm sure we're going to get plenty of those check down passes. And Seattle's also allowed a starting running back to score at least 11 PPR points in 5 of the last 6 games. So there is, I don't want to say it's a absolute, 20-point outburst from Kareem Hunt, but you're looking at a guy that's going to get you somewhere from that 10 to 13 point range. He's got that touchdown upside. The only thing I will say, and I want to start doing this a little bit more often. I love this lesson from Sigmund Bloom, which is try to incorporate the bad into all of your good analysis, just to leave both ends open here. The Seattle defense has not allowed a rushing touchdown over the last 3 games. They also have not given up a single receiving touchdown. So there is the negative side of it. All that touchdown upside that Kareem Hunt has had.
Hey, what Seattle I hear offense, is that they're due. They're due to give one up, right?
Hey, it's the eye of the beholder, however you want to look at it. It sounds like maybe they're just going to give one up. All right.
Now, I don't want to sit here and just poo-poo on your take. That's not what I want to do at all. But I did mention it a little bit.
Never
I did mention it, though, a little bit, when I was talking about why I would start my guy, Rhamondre Stevenson, ahead of Kareem Hunt this week. Do you have concerns about Pierre Strong? And that's really what it comes down to for me. As long as we've seen Kevin Stefanski coaching this Cleveland Browns team, it's always kind of been a 1-2 punch. Even when they had Nick Chubb, arguably the best running back in football, they were still working in a second back. So I think that's kind of my fear, is that even with Jerome Ford out, I don't think that we just see Kareem Hunt step into a huge workload. I think Pierre Strong is going to be plenty involved. And if we look back at last week's usage, after Jerome Ford exited the game, Pierre Strong out-touched Kareem Hunt 5-2. So I worry that Kareem Hunt's role might kind of be stuck what it is, kind of as the change of pace guy. And I think Pierre Strong might actually be the guy who takes on the bulk of the work in this game. And totally speculating, I don't know anything at all, but I think Cleveland, they traded for Pierre Strong in the preseason. They didn't just snatch him up off waivers. Like, they went out and actionably traded for him, which makes me think that they like something in Pierre Strong.
I mean, I'm sure they do. It seems fairly obvious that they do. But they also went and signed Kareem Hunt off the street, and then they've been playing him over Pierre Strong. So listen, it's not, one of us is probably going to be right, or because it's fantasy football, right? Neither of us,
or because it's against
right.
Seattle, we're both right, and both guys end up looking good this week.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't know, especially, and you're right, with the Kevin Stefanski offense, it's usually 2 running backs. I hate this term, but I think we're going to use it. I do think that Kareem Hunt's going to end up being the 1A out of this group, right? And we've seen that they've kind of leaned on him. The thing is, Kareem Hunt still had more touches overall in that game last week. When Ford went out, then they kind of switched to Pierre Strong, and I wonder how much of that is, okay, we don't have Jerome Ford anymore. Kareem Hunt does have the thigh injury. Maybe we've got to ease up here and let's keep everybody healthy for next week. So there's a lot of ways we can look at it. We can kind of keep traveling down that narrative street. But my thought here with Kareem Hunt is, if you don't have 2 absolute must-start running backs, I've got Kareem Hunt right there on that edge as a high upside guy who's going to give you that good receiving floor. Now, let's move on to the next running back start that we've got here. Dave, give us your next running back start.
This is another guy that I wasn't too crazy about in the preseason, and I know a lot of people are thinking about benching him this week, but Dameon Pierce, I think we can finally see a good bounce back this week up against Carolina. Carolina's given up 33.6 points per game to running backs. That's the second most among any defense in the league. They are a winless team, and teams have been able to run against them when they take an early lead. Now, I think the concern here with Dameon Pierce is obviously that we saw his snaps plummet in week 6 before the bye, and that is absolutely concerning. We saw Devin Singletary take on a much bigger role than I think anybody had imagined. But that was against a very stout New Orleans run defense, and Devin Singletary didn't do great either. They kind of stifled both of these running backs, and Dameon Pierce just didn't get much work later on in the game. But if you're in running back trouble this weekend, for whatever reason, there are some injuries to some pretty prominent guys out there. I don't even mind Devin Singletary as kind of a desperation flex. This Carolina run defense has been so bad that I think both Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary are startable, but I think Dameon Pierce kind of takes the stranglehold of this backfield. I think that what we saw in that week 6 game before the bye was a little bit of an apparition. So I'm starting him ahead of Brian Robinson, who has a really tough matchup up against Philadelphia. We've also seen him kind of get phased out of games when the game script isn't working in his favor. I'm starting Dameon Pierce ahead of Najee Harris going up against Jacksonville. I'm starting him ahead of Zach Moss against New Orleans now that we're seeing Jonathan Taylor start to pull away with that backfield a little bit more. So Dameon Pierce, much like Rhamondre Stevenson, kind of works in as a back-end RB2 for me, but has a pretty high ceiling in this matchup.
Yeah, I don't dislike this one because of the matchup, because, I think there is still hope that Dameon Pierce can pull this out, and it's not just going to slowly transition into Devin Singletary's backfield. I will say this is what always makes me nervous is teams coming out of the bye week. And they usually use that week to either let's let's implore a new guy, right? And let's unleash Devin Singletary as the running back, or this was our time to get Dameon Pierce right. This has been a whole new offense. And something that Sigmund Bloom and I talked about yesterday is, this Texans team, they're taking time to gel into this new rushing attack, the same way that the Ravens took time to gel into their new passing attack. So, Dave, I think you're absolutely right here with wanting to start Dameon Pierce, especially kind of let's steal Sig's word, as a what the heck flex, right? Or as a low end RB2. This could be the get right game for him. It absolutely could. I'm going to move on here.
Just getting ahead real quickly. I mean, I know the offensive line has been a big issue so far for the Texans this year. Looks like Laramie Tunsil's at practice, so that's good to see. Titus Howard at practice. Yeah, so all of these guys are back in practice this week. So hopefully that bye also gave the offensive line an opportunity to heal up, rest up a little bit, because we know they have a very good offensive line. It's just been banged up for the majority of this season.
Yeah, I'm not going to fight you on either of these Texans running backs being solid starts this week. Let me give you my guy here who's going to be a sleeper running back start, and it's Emari Demercado going up against the Baltimore Ravens. And I think that a lot of people they're a little gun shy now because we saw Emari Demercado look good in his fill-in role, and then everyone went out and spent a bunch of money on him, and then we were all disappointed. And then all of a sudden, oh, look, he actually is good and he is going to get the bulk of the touches. And we're still not very sure what to do with this Cardinals backfield. But I think that we've seen it. Emari Demercado is going to be the lead guy on this team. He's got the versatility to be used in the passing game. Since week 5, he's been averaging 9 PPR points, which I know is not a lot, right? He had that one game where I'm going to check it right now as I'm saying this, but he put up a 0, Dave, or very close to it. Let me see here. Yeah, 2.7 fantasy points in week 6. But before that, he had games of 11.5 and 12.5 PPR points. So if that's what you're needing, and you're needing kind of that desperation flex, or maybe you're in a 3 running back league, or your running back roster looks pretty bad, Demercado's a guy that ends up being a pretty good start. And the Baltimore Ravens haven't been as scary as they have been in the past. I've got Demercado as my running back 31 on the week. I am projected for just about 11 points, a little bit under that. But Demercado, he's been the best running back there for the Cardinals, averaging 4.5 yards per carry. He's had at least 3 targets in 3 of his last 4 games, so he's getting that receiving work. And the Ravens have allowed running back to average just over 57 receiving yards per game. So if Demercado is going to get that receiving work, and the Ravens are allowing that to happen, especially with the way they're scoring, the Cardinals are going to have to try to keep up. So I do expect that there's going to be quite a bit of passing in this game. I will say, and once again, I continue with these caveats, the bad here is the Baltimore Ravens have only allowed 2 rushing touchdowns all season. But then there's kind of a good news, a little silver lining. Those 2 rushing touchdowns have come in the last 2 weeks. So maybe we're starting to see that Baltimore rushing defense soften up a little bit. So Emari Demercado becomes a good spot start this week.
Yeah, you're not going to get any pushback from me here. This is 3 straight weeks now where Emari Demercado has led the backfield in routes run as well. So, again, trying to predict game script a little bit here. This Baltimore offense is gelling. We expect the Cardinals to probably be playing from behind. So, even though on paper it might look like a scary matchup up against Baltimore, this could be one of those, much like we saw last week against Detroit, where Jahmyr Gibbs just racked up a ton of points in the passing game late in the game. We can see a similar outing from Demercado this week.
Now, before we keep going on here to our wide receiver starts of the week, I want to ask you guys to do something for us, okay? Head on over to the audio version of this show, to the podcast. And what we want to see, okay, is your best ideas for an episode of this show. Whatever your best idea is, leave it in a review. Your review can be whatever you want it to be, but leave the best idea that you have. What do you want to hear from us? What do you want to see from us here on this show throughout the rest of the season? Because we're going to get to a point here where there's not going to be trade deadlines, trades available anymore past the trade deadline. And we're looking at those fantasy playoffs. And, so we want to see what's the most creative idea that you guys have. Maybe help us out here a little bit. Our brains are getting a little fried, but leave that in a review over on Apple Podcasts. Take a screenshot of that and send that over to Kluge at footballguys.com, Kluge. And the best idea gets an automatic bid into next year's listener league here for the Football Guys Fantasy Football Show. Once again, send that over to Kluge at footballguys.com.
I just want to say that listener league this year has been an absolute blast. I'm having a really fun time.
Been so fun.
I know everybody that's in this league is probably listening to the show right now. It has been a really, really good time. And, Alfredo, I just got to say, 12-team league. You know who's sitting in first and second place right now?
I don't know. Who is it?
It's you and me. Looking good. Like it.
Sorry, league. What kind of people are we that were like, yeah, we invited a bunch of guys to be in our league and we're beating them.
You got to say, we know there is a little bit of luck. There is a little bit of luck in fantasy football, and that luck is, in our favor this year, but it is pretty cool to see you and I sitting atop that leaderboard right now. Let's see if it'll last in the playoffs.
I'll say this. There's 4 of us all tied with the same record, but just because the point's 4, that's what puts, yours truly at first place right now.
Now I just put a target on both of our backs.
Yes, you did. There we go. We do it for the fans. Dave, bring us over to our wide receiver starts of the week. Give us your first guy.
Now, this seems like such an obvious start. Drake London going up against Tennessee, but I was thinking about something the other day. Like, week 1 really puts such a strong taste in everybody's mouth that it takes almost an entire year for them to get over it. I mean, Calvin Ridley is one example. People saw Calvin Ridley ball out as an alpha wide receiver 1. And even though he's been playing, basically unstartable football since, people are still hoping that he's going to return to form to what we saw in week 1. And Drake London saw 1 target and 0 points in week 1. And since then, I think people are just still kind of have this bad taste in their mouth when it comes to Drake London. But he has been very, very good. Since that week 1 outing where he had 0 points and 1 target, he's averaging 8.2 targets per game and is the wide receiver 15 in scoring. Overall, if you're looking per game scoring, he's the wide receiver 21, which is still very, very good. And now he goes up against Tennessee, who was the worst team in the league last year against wide receivers and is allowing more points per game to wide receivers this year than they were last year. And Desmond Ridder, dare I say it, hasn't looked too bad the last couple of weeks. Sure, the gaffes have been there. The gaffes have been there, the fumbles at the goal line and getting the ball punched out as he's running across the plane in the end zone. But overall, if you take away some of those bonehead mistakes, he's looked like a pretty good quarterback the last couple of weeks. And Tennessee, it looks like they're just kind of throwing in the towel this year. Talking about trading away Derrick Henry, it looks like they're having a little fire sale. Yeah, throwing in all the towels. Starting Will Levis this week is really another indication.
That's a big beach towel. That's one of those extra large 3-person beach towels right there. Yeah.
And this is a game where right now, we can say all the terrible things we want about Arthur Smith, but the Falcons are sitting number 1 right now in the NFC South. This game is an easy opportunity for them to pull ahead even further in the NFC South. So talked about Calvin Ridley. I'm actually starting Drake London ahead of Calvin Ridley this week. I'm starting him ahead of Tyler Lockett going up against Cleveland. Even Michael Pittman, who has looked great for the last couple of weeks, is pulling that Marshawn Lattimore shadow this week. So those are just a few guys that I'm starting Desmond Ridder ahead of. I have him inside my top 24 on the week.
Just to confirm there, I think you said Desmond Ridder. You mean Drake London, correct?
Yes. Yes,
him too.
Starting
both. Start Desmond Ritter at wide receiver, everybody.
I actually, in super flex leagues, I don't hate Desmond Ritter as kind of a streaming option this week. He's inside my top 20. Like I said, Tennessee, this just isn't a good pass defense. And I think that, we're going to want to see Arthur Smith step on the pedal a little bit. So don't hate Desmond Ritter, but Drake London is the guy that I really like as a start this week.
Dave, we did not do a trade targets episode this week, but if we had, Drake London would have been probably my top guy there. Looking ahead at this schedule, the Falcons have the number one easiest schedule for fantasy wide receivers going forward. You talk about the Titans this week, Minnesota next week, Arizona. Look at the playoffs, man. Tampa Bay, Carolina, Indy, Chicago. Whew, that little stretch of games there. Drake London's been really good. I'm happy for my breakout. He's playing well. That's a good call by you this week, Dave. All right, let me get to my wide receiver start of the week, and it's going to be Nico Collins, wide receiver for the Houston Texans. He's been averaging 17 fantasy points per game, and it's been up and down. Like, I'm not going to say that it's been very consistent. It's been a little up and down, and going up against Carolina this week, correct? It's not been as easy a matchup as we might have thought. The Carolina Panthers have been 11th versus wide receivers. But Dave, you and I have talked about this, is that it's not always about, them being really good at stopping wide receivers. It's been more so teams don't have to throw against the Carolina Panthers, right? Because their defense is scoring points
Texans
off
last year. The Texans had the best defense against quarterbacks because quarterbacks would let off the gas pedal halfway through the second quarter.
Yeah, and the defenses are scoring points off of Bryce Young mistakes, and teams are able to run really easily on the Panthers, which is why you have Dameon Pierce as one of your starts. So I get it. But Nico Collins kind of fits into this really good mold. He's my wide receiver 20 on the week. I got him projected for just a little over 14 points. And Nico has had 12 or more PPR points in 4 of his last 6 games this season. And the Panthers have allowed 6 touchdowns to receivers over the last 4 weeks. So we're kind of looking at a guy who has been just good enough versus a team that has allowed just enough. And Carolina's allowed 6 receivers to catch at least 6 receptions in 4 of the last 5 games. So once again, we keep talking about this defense that on the surface, it looks like it's a tough matchup for a wide receiver, but it's really not. A team's top wide receiver. Yeah. I mean, well, so this was a very specific way to look at it. A team's top receiver, so whoever the wide receiver 1 is on that unit, has scored 14 or more PPR points in every game since week 2 against the Panthers. And that's including one game where Josh Reynolds was the wide receiver 1 for the Lions because there was no Amon-Ra St. Brown, right? So this is a game where I do think Nico Collins can exploit the secondary. CJ Stroud is also another one of those quarterbacks that's pretty streamable this week. Spoiler alert, he's not my streamer of the week at quarterback, but I think that, that passing attack for Houston looks good. But Dave, to go back to your start, Dameon Pierce, I think the bad thing here and the possibility that's always there is teams can just run on the Panthers, and the Texans might use this as a get right game for their rushing attack that they have not been able to establish. And we could just see a ton of Dameon Pierce, a ton of Devin Singletary. So, I like putting in these little, emergency escape pods for me in each of these starts so that if someone does get mad and they say it in the comments, it's like, well, I told you. I said there was a negative. I wasn't that sure. All right. Dave, take us on over to your next wide receiver start of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like double dipping, triple dipping, whatever you want to call it.
You don't double and triple dip. You never do that. That's disgusting.
Rashee Rice has been my number 1 waiver wire priority for back-to-back weeks. He was my start of the week last week, and I'm just kind of trying to continue to ride the hot hand here. Talked about it on Monday's show, but only Deontay Johnson, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Amon-Ra St. Brown are averaging more targets per route run than Rashee Rice, and we have seen Rashee Rice's routes run and his snap share grow for 3 consecutive weeks, where he has been the number 2 pass catching option behind only Travis Kelce in this offense. Now he gets to face off against Denver. Denver's averaging more pass yards per attempt than any other team. They've allowed 16 passing touchdowns so far this season, more than any other team. And Rashee Rice has scored touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. I think he makes it 3 straight weeks that he finds the end zone this week, continues to see this workload grow. This is a game where it has the 3rd highest over-under of the week. And a lot of those points aren't going to be coming from Denver. So this is going to be one where I think the Chiefs just really run up the score on Denver, a divisional game that could get out of hand pretty quickly. So starting Rashee Rice pretty comfortably this week, wherever I can, ahead of DeAndre Hopkins, with Will Levis throwing the ball. Eesh, don't know what that could look like. Also get the AJ Terrell shadow. So if this was a sits show, got it better that time. No Sorry Joe this time around.
You did it very slowly, very carefully.
This is not a sit show. And but I would have DeAndre Hopkins as a sit this week. Get pretty worried about that one. I've also got him ahead of Tank Dell against Carolina. Like you said, I think this is a game where Nico Collins really gets right, and Tank Dell can kind of take a back seat. And then Tyler Lockett, who I talked about a little bit earlier, is somebody that I would start Drake London ahead of. I'm also starting Rashee Rice ahead of. So some pretty big names that I am comfortable putting Rashee Rice ahead of to try to get him into your lineup this week if you can.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at Rashee Rice right now, and he's had double-digit fantasy points in 4 of the last 5 games, and he's had it in 5 of 7 games this season. He's almost a safe bet every single week, and we just keep, as you're saying, we keep seeing that workload grow for him. 2 touchdowns in the last 3 games here. Going up against Denver. I don't know, Dave, do you think he's going to draw Pat Surtain in that secondary?
Even if he does, Surtain hasn't really been that good this year. I hate to say it.
No,
we talked about it with Sig last week. Like, he has not looked that good. And Sig kind of make the joke, like, how could you get fired up playing for Sean Payton? But Surtain has been a shutdown corner since he's come into the league. And this year he is outside the 70th percentile on PFF's coverage grades. I mean, he has not been good this year.
Well, and I mean, just to even further your point is, I think there's a reason that this wide receiver group for the Chiefs is so difficult to read, because there isn't ever a wide receiver 1 or someone that the opposing defense says, "Ooh, we got to go stop that guy," because it's always Travis Kelce. So right. I think that Rashee Rice is going to continue to move around plenty. All right, I'm going to take you to my wide receiver sleeper of the week, and it is Josh Palmer of the Los Angeles Chargers going up against Dave's Chicago Bears. Sorry, had to do it to you. But Palmer has been really good this year, and we knew this was going to happen. As soon as he took over for Mike Williams, we knew, okay, this is where Josh Palmer's going to get a lot of work. And I think there's a lot of people that have been holding out hope for Quentin Johnston, and it's not happening for him right now. And maybe it happens later. Maybe it just doesn't happen at all this season. Josh Palmer's been a valuable starter and a great waiver wire pickup early on in the season. Since week 3, Josh Palmer's averaged over 13 fantasy points per game. Going up against the Bears this week, they're 18th versus fantasy wide receivers. I've got Palmer on the fringe there. He's about my wide receiver 30. So in 3 wide receiver leagues, or if you need a flex, I think Palmer is a perfect start there. I've got him projected for roughly 13 fantasy points this week, and he's scored double-digit PPR points in every single one of his starts this season since Mike Williams has gone down. And since week 4, he's had a 24% target share, leading to 7 or more targets in each game. I mean, you can't ask for much more from a guy who's the second wide receiver on a team, especially a guy that you picked up off waivers. This passing attack continues to be good. I know the team overall is struggling. That rushing attack has been struggling for sure. But going up against the Bears, they've allowed 7 receptions, at least this past week. They allowed 7 receptions to both Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers in week 7. And, Chicago, they've been a little up and down. Jalen Johnson, I know, is a very good corner, and there are some good players on this Bears defense, but
the Bears better extend him. They have made a habit out of letting young, talented defenders walk away the last few years. If they don't extend Jalen Johnson, I am going to pull my hair out.
You'll see us next week. Dave's going to be bald. It's going to be great. Yeah. Listen, the Chargers here for this game, and this is probably the bad part, right? And you have to watch game scripts. The Chargers are 8.5 point favorites, which is, one of the biggest spreads of the week. And this game could get out of reach early, right? If Tyson Bagent struggles, Chargers could go up early, and we could see that passing volume take a dip. So it is very possible. I do think, however, this game might be a little bit closer than what the Vegas lines indicate. The Chargers just have not been able to put together any of those dominant performances yet, and their defense remains equally as bad. And so the Bears should be able to run on this team and maybe slow down the pace a little bit. So we could see a decent back and forth, not quite that, boat race that we could see from the Chargers beating up on the Bears this week.
Yeah, I love Josh Palmer. There's kind of this misconception that he only is good based on volume, but like he's actually just a really good football player. Like he's very sure-handed. He gets open. He was one of my favorite final round draft picks in best ball this year because, you know, you and I both talked about it. We really like Justin Herbert this year. So when I'd get Justin Herbert, I'm sitting there in round 18. I'm like, why not draft Josh Palmer for free at the end of my draft? And he's looked really, really good. I mean, he has solidified himself as the wide receiver 2 here. You know, it's possible Quentin Johnston could get on track, but it doesn't look like it. I mean, we've seen nothing that indicates that Quentin Johnston is going to take that step forward so far this year. So I think you just kind of keep riding the hot hand with Josh Palmer and keep trying to get him in your lineup every single week until you have reason not to.
Well, Dave, we talked about this week being sort of the Cheesecake Factory week, where there's just too many options at these different positions. So if you're looking at your team, you're looking at waivers, you're looking at the quarterbacks and tight ends, and you're just like, I don't know who to start. There's so many of these guys. It's freaking me out. Guess what? We're going to help you with that. But we're going to do that over on the audio version of this show. And we've gotten some of those comments like, what? I can't believe to get this position, I got to go over to the audio version of your show. I promise you.
It's worth it.
It's a great show. It's fun, man. We're going to continue having the same fun just over on audio. You just don't get to see our beautiful faces. But the link for that show is in the description down below. All you have to do is click on that, whichever your favorite podcast platform is, whether it's Apple, Spotify, anything like that. You're going to be able to listen to our QB and tight end streamers of the week. Thank you all for joining us all the way this far here on the video. We'll catch you over on the other side. Adios.